We are continuing with our briefing. We will speak about Ukraine's most recent steps, last steps on the way to free regime with the EU. And we'll hear today representatives of the Europe Without Borders NGO, exactly Iryna Sushko, the head of the organization, and project manager from there, Mariana Kuzio. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear media representatives. The topic of visa-free regime implementation is undoubtedly of high relevance, and it has been relevant for 5 years in a row. It becomes increasingly important with the view of the upcoming Riga summit that is scheduled for this May. Our officials frequently say that it will be at this Riga summit that Ukrainians will have a chance to finally hear about the long-awaited cancellation of visa regime in Ukraine's relationships with the EU. And this is one of the objectives we've longed for quite long, and this is the objective, one of the objectives of the civic society efforts, also within the scope of the action plan on visa liberalization that Ukraine received in 2010. And we've seen really a thorough work by a number of line institutions, coordinated at the moment by the Ministry of External Affairs of Ukraine, the Government Office for European Integration, and many other institutions. So the first question stands as, should we really expect any breakthroughs at Riga summit? Our forecast will be based, first of all, on our assessment of whether Ukraine has complied with all the actions it has committed to adopted this visa liberalization agenda. The quick answer will be no. We have not. In order to hear some positive signal from Riga, we first of all need to get information from the government that every step necessary and needed from the Ukrainian side has been done. Surely we all want free access to the Schengen area, but it is related to very important reforms, because visa liberalization agenda is actually a roadmap that contains very important steps in such areas as migration, safety of documents, safety of borders, public safety, and many more tasks also related to mitigation of corruption, fight against organized crime, money laundering, or human trafficking. It also involves reforms in such important area as fight against discrimination, and we can only noted today that it has been complicated for Ukraine to cope with these tasks, also with the view of the current situation in the country with regard to specifically this military armed conflict in the east of Ukraine that effectively limits government's capacities to complete this list of reforms and reform steps. There are 50 of them. And responding to such challenges could be seen as Ukraine's real progress towards visa liberalization. And we can conveniently add here issues of IDPs and border security measures. About a day ago, I returned from Yerevan, where I was at Euronest conference, And I can tell you that all the Eastern Partnership countries unilaterally supported the idea of visa-free regime introduction for Ukraine. They said that such decisions should be adopted by relevant institutions in the EU without regard to the existing conflict in Ukraine. But let us be clear here. Already now we need to work real thoroughly with representatives of EU countries and European institutions to muster necessary political support for that. So the remaining tasks, I'd like to list them, going along the security of documents topic. We all know that last January the State Migration Service started issuing new biometric IDs, biometric passports, without which it would not be possible to enjoy this visa-free regime. But very soon the government acknowledged the fact that they complied with some criteria of visa liberalization, though it is not the case exactly. Introducing just biometric passports does not solve the problem in itself. And we need to work here not only using the results and feedbacks from the Europe Without Barriers monitoring, but also by the results of European Commission's mission here that visited Ukraine in December and last year, early 2015. This provided a wealth of background information, and we received also from them certain inquiries and recommendations as to what the government should do to really comply with the commitments within the agenda. So coming back to the issue of protection of personal data, what will happen to the unified state register? It has been envisaged and provided for by the legislation, and we need more than 1 million hryvnias for its implementation. The questions raised in this regard by human rights organizations about certain disparities between this register and its regulations and norms of personal data protection have to be answered yet. We also need to deal with the huge problem of counterfeit documents, because introducing biometric passports will require specific changes to also the system of domestic passports. We are going to see ID cards which need to be more protected, more layers of protection than they are envisaged at this moment. Independent experts also mention it, that by complicating the procedure, we can go really at odds with human rights protection requirements. This is another set of issues that to require proper public discussion, public debates, also with the civic society. If we go to point 2, which concerns asylum, there are questions related to status of persons that never granted this protected person status. We need to update our rules that relate to persons, refugees actually sought after in other countries and having no protection as refugees. You know, many people also in Russia that would really enjoy political refugee status. There is a huge bunch of issues relating to public security and safety. And we are not also capable of boasting any serious progresses in the fight against corruption today. Yes, we do know how much has been done by the government and the parliament. We knew of an updated legislative basis in the fight against corruption area that has been filtered and refined by huge groups of experts. And we are in the process of establishing official institutions to fight actively against corruption. But still, this is not enough, because we need to show some outcomes of the process. We need to show some progress. And if we come back to Greco recommendations, we've so far complied with just 15 or 16 of them, and there's more than 26 of them, if I'm not mistaken. That is, Ukraine needs to show and prove that something is being done really, and all the institutions we speak about are not just freshly established in a most transparent way, but they are working and they're delivering. And we have some really high-profile cases and high-profile names in this regard, which could serve as this objectivation measure. We also need a strategy of fight against corruption. We need relevant policies. We need to show how decisive the reform is. We can also tie it to relevant reform measures as regards to the reform of law enforcement agencies, General Prosecution Office. This also regards certain steps related to the immunity of judges, prosecutors, enhancing liability of law enforcement agencies and officers. We need better monitoring potential in the anti-drug trafficking system. It is also important to finally come up with an operational protocol of cooperation between Europol and the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We need to set up a dependent information exchange channels. And another block that specifically deals with discrimination, I'd like my colleague to share that.
Thank you, Iryna. We remember very well the development of events that was related to the unit number 4, or block number 4, discriminative steps. The government of Ukraine had to introduce in order to fulfill the criteria, and we remember very well the intensive discussions of this issue in Ukrainian parliament, and how long was the procedure of adoption for the legislation in non-discrimination. And we know that the basic legislation now has been adopted, specifically the law against discrimination. As well, it was a comment of the Supreme Administrative Court on the features of the non-discriminative nature, and it was the demand of European side, and people who were responsible for monitoring, they evaluated that. And today, the standpoints of both sides has been coordinated. Both EU and Ukraine has adopted this legislation. Of course, certain comments still exist from European side, and it was proved by the experts during the visit to Ukraine, experts of European Union. And of course, certain changes should be made to labor code in order to secure the equality of labor rights for Ukrainian citizens. Here, you as well have the so-called sexual orientation group of indicators. Another problem, what is very difficult for experts gathered in evaluation mission, the cases that could prove the comment from the Supreme Administrative Court when they checked if the legislation is being implemented properly. It was very difficult for them because of the lack of court proceedings, court cases, and today both ombudsman of Verkhovna Rada works on collection of such court cases in order to verify if this legislation is really in hand or not. Is it acting? And today both financial and institutional capacity of the Ombudsman office is limited, and consequently this office is limited in its functions, and that's why one of the recommendations was to increase capacity, specifically financial capacity of the human rights official. If any questions, we are ready to answer. Before Q&A, I would like to say a couple of words. Europe Without Barriers has certain plans to have an individual event, which is a public discussions on the visa liberalization. We will invite, by all means, everybody who has any relation to making decision in this issue, and we expect it will be a full discussion support from Ukrainian media, but it doesn't mean that it means that the work must go on and not to be aggravated with anything. And again, we ask Ukrainian government not to stick anything to certain anniversary or something. It's post-Soviet tradition that you have some event and you must complete it before this event comes. So we must have work directly with the representatives of EU member states. A little remark, question. Do you have any plans to have an online translation of the discussion to hear from public? This is a good idea, and I believe it will be very important, and of course we will try to arrange for that. You are speaking about the objective reasons that do not give us opportunity to obtain the visa-free status. On the other hand, you say that our partners support us, but we observed recently the consular department of embassies, they put strict barriers now. Could you give any comments of what correlation between the supportive words and deeds of consular departments? Thank you for this, say, controversial situation. On the one hand, we have a visa dialogue and visa simplification of visa procedures. And of course, this agreement gave us certain results after several years of implementation. But I agree that today the problems are in place. And when we are saying about the visa liberalization, and the consequences to that must be removal of visa regime. I should remind you that Ukraine now is on the second stage of visa liberalization. That means that it is illogical for consular departments of EU member states. It is illogical to make visa requirements harder. On the other hand, visa always was treated as a tool of security. You know that illegal immigration and criminals, they pay no attention to visa regime. That's why the number of filters, additional number of filters imposed by European Union in order to obtain a visa. It's a reaction of European Union on the military conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and this is kind of a measure against illegal migration, labor migration, political migration, other types of migration, and we will try to make it easier, make it better, this process. The very interesting fact, in spite of military actions, we do not observe the increase of migration, and not that it could be, say, danger for internal security or security of EU member state. Probably in Poland only the number of people seeking shelter has increased, and it is not only a task for non-governmental sector, it's a task of the governmental migration service jointly with other agencies. We must deliver this information to EU member states for them to understand the situation. Duch Kobzar, Counselor of the President of European Business Assembly, could you please tell us if you probably work in parallel with fighting against total corruption, that do not want to mitigate starting from 2003? And do you agree that there is growth in migration of foreign business working here and our business that do not see any perspective here? And for the third day I try trying to get access to Ukrainian ambassador to the This is the only one question. I do not have anything to answer because I've already mentioned corruption, which is one of the components of the visa liberalization. If you forgot something, you have press releases with very clear wording on that. If you are speaking about business association, please give us statistical data from different sources. Then we will have room for discussion. Thank you. Hopefully in the nearest future the discussion you've mentioned will start, and of course it will be just in time. Once again, sometimes something that is pronounced in this open discussion, it is different from the words being pronounced from lectern, from the officials, and in many cases probably it will be clearer for us why we have double standards in politics. Thank you very much, and hopefully does UCMC could be our media partner? Okay, we'll put it on the personal vis-a-vis basis. Thank you.
Можна поміняти телефончики, ми з вами, я свої